Australian Aviation Podcast, the official podcast of Australian Aviation, unpacking the latest insights, developments and issues impacting Australia's aviation sector.
Hello everybody, my name is Adam Thorne and welcome to the Australian Aviation Podcast. I am joined as usual by Aerospace's answer to Baldrick, Jake Nelson. Jake, how are you?
I've got a cunning plan, Adam.
Do you? It's been a relatively quiet week in the news. I think it's not been like the most exciting week we've ever had, to be honest. So we're going to have to pad it out with some shout outs and other information. Jake, what do we got this week?
Well, a reminder to all of our listeners that we will be at the Avalon Air Show next week.
Yeah.
We mentioned this last week on the podcast, but you and I will both be there from Tuesday to Thursday, and I believe you will also be there on Friday because you're heading back to Sydney on Saturday.
Saturday morning, yeah.
I'll be heading back to Sydney on Friday afternoon. So if you see us there, give us a wave. And
don't necessarily get near us. Because a lot of our listeners are quite strange, which makes sense because it's a very strange show. So keep your distance, wave it first, and then if we kind of beckon you over, then you can approach. Yeah, don't approach initially.
Picture us as like, you're trying to like feed a deer that you found in the woods. Just make sure that we're not skittish. Maybe hold out your hand, offer us some carrots or something, and see if we approach.
So we're the deer.
We are the deer in this situation because we can be shy and skittish around humans.
Do we have deers in Australia?
Possibly feral ones somewhere.
Okay, yeah. I didn't know. I've never seen a deer in. Could we not be like kangaroos? Because similar sort of thing, isn't it? With the roos, you've got to be careful when you approach them.
Yeah, but kangaroos are more likely to kick you so hard that your intestines leave your body.
I don't rule that out because a lot of our listeners are very strange. And if you're really weird and you cross a line, I will. They punch you, don't they, kangaroos?
And they also have a really powerful kick.
Oh, okay. Do they really?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I mean, with legs like that.
Yeah. So that's me saying to our readers and listeners, if you get near me, I will physically hurt you. That's going to go down well, isn't it?
But yes, we'll be at Avalon. So looking forward to it. And we should also be presenting at least one episode of the podcast live from the Avalon Air Show. I did air quotes here.
Air quotes, yeah. So it will be very good. And actually not talking of Avalon, it's a totally different thing. We have had our print magazine has actually been printed finally, and is landed on our desks. If you are a subscriber to the magazine, God willing, it will arrive imminently. Or you might have already had it. It wouldn't surprise me if we weren't like the last to receive it. But it looks all right in the end. I think this looks pretty good.
It's also got, tying it in, is a better segue, a complete guide to the aircraft that will be on display at Avalon just in time. The show is next week. Yeah,
we'd have been in a bit of trouble if it had come out late. Anyway, there's loads of good stuff in it.
And I've written some articles too.
Yeah, talk us through the stuff you've written. You've done some good stuff.
Yeah, so for this story, you might remember over the Christmas break, we had a podcast with Paul Boyce, who was the Darwin manager for TAA, Trans-Australia Airlines, at the time of Cyclone Tracy. And so we did a feature on that, based on that interview, on the response of aviation to Cyclone Tracy and how Darwin and the country came together. If you haven't listened to that podcast over the break, give it a listen. It's a very good podcast, but you will also find the feature article based on that podcast in this issue of the magazine.
It also has, before we move on from this, we were able to get some amazing photographs that illustrated what happened to Paul and what happened to Darwin. If you are watching this on the YouTube, I don't know if this will come out. I'm holding up the issue now, but this photo here shows the kind of the wreckage after Cyclone Tracy. It's amazing to think that we had Cyclone. Was it Alfred or?
Tropical Cyclone Alfred, that was renamed from Tropical Cyclone Anthony because there's an election coming.
Yes, and obviously it was technically downgraded to ex-Tropical Cyclone. Boo, it's just ruined our fun. But basically, you think about, you had a big cyclone hit Brisbane, and ultimately Brisbane survived. Obviously it was good, but obviously it was a very dangerous thing, but the buildings didn't all fall over. Imagine having a cyclone in Darwin, and it literally wipes out the whole city. 80% of buildings, I think, almost totally destroyed. They basically had to evacuate the entire city and they had to rebuild the thing from scratch. It feels like something that's almost unimaginable. It was extraordinary. And the photos here that illustrate this are absolutely brilliant. Talk us through what else you've written, Jake.
Yeah, we've got in here, and by the way, thank you to Paul Boyce for the interview, and thank you to the Library and Archives NT for use of a lot of those photographs. We've got in here a story on the sort of a collated timeline of Rex's ill-fated venture into domestic jet operations, starting from when they had the idea back in, I think it was 2020 or 2021, and going right through to... essentially now with so starting in 2020 when they first had the idea and made the announcement, and then going right through to to February this year when the government said it may nationalize the airline if it can't find a buyer. We've got we've got excerpts from most of the stories that we've written on the subject over the years, charting the course of Rex's domestic venture through takeoff, its inevitable rise, cruising altitude, and then its fiery crash landing.
Yeah, excellent. We've also got a feature which is basically an extract from a new book on the Douglas Boston in RAF service. I need to interview the author, Michael Clarenborg. I'll be tapping you up soon because I said we do a podcast with him as well. But it's an amazing extract that talks through almost like this kind of forgotten aircraft. And we've also managed to track down some good photos to go with it as well. And our kind of cover feature, just to wrap this up, is looking at the F-35, because we've now, since our last issue or the issue before last came out, Australia was either the last of its F-35 Lightning IIs. So we've now got a complete fleet. So what I've done is talked a little bit about the history of the F-35 in RAF service, and also track down all the right photos. So when we do these kind of photo features, I try hard not just to obviously shove any old photo in, but to kind of track the history, show the most important moments, and talk a little bit about the context. But the cover headline is a new era, because this is kind of the start of a new era for the RAF, for Australian Defence. We've got all of our usuals. We've got Warbirds, Traffic, Register.
We've got some opinion pieces in there as well.
Oh yeah, let's not bring attention to that, because I had to slide that through. If the senior management of Momentum Media hear this, you could be for the goner, you could be for the plank.
I make no apologies for opposing the scourge that is Elon Musk at any and all opportunity. But we've got as well in here, Adam, a fantastic feature from you about Paul and Jet Bennett and their participation in air shows. Yeah. 19-year-old Jet is now performing stunts alongside his father, Paul.
Yeah. I almost want to go back. So we basically did a Q&A interview based on when we went to the Hunter Valley Air Show. And it's an amazing story. So you've got Paul Bennett, who is basically the most famous stunt pilot in Australia, who quite literally started up his entire his own company, which tours the country putting on air shows. Like, without Paul Bennett, there's almost no air shows in Australia. So he is a very high-profile figure, and incredibly, his son has followed him into the game. But Paul himself was very adamant that his son wouldn't be being allowed to fly in the shows and fly with him until he was good enough. He had to go there, enter competitions and win competitions before he was allowed to do it. So it's an incredible kind of father and son double act. So it was a very interesting thing to do.
It is, yes. And thank you as well to Australian aviation reader Chris Parry, who supplied a story about a Spitfire that we have titled "A Story About a Spitfire." Yes,
and also I mean to call you Chris. You're another person on my list. It was really, really, really good. He happened to send us a story mere hours before we went to print, which was wonderful because we had a page go and spare. So that is a really, really good read, a really beautifully written thing.
And a look as well inside the ATSB and how it does its vital work to ensure air safety in Australia.
What more do you want? Subscribe now. You can subscribe on our website just to get the physical print copy, old school, or you can kind of get a digital subscription so you can look at it online. Right, that's the plug over. Actually, I've got one more thing.
Oh, yeah.
Before we steam into the news. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago, we dispatched Jordan the Great and we replaced him with Jacob from the ABC.
Jacob the Pending.
Yep. It has been a massive upgrade in terms of video quality, etc. But I think it has time now has come to give him like a nickname to put him in your kind of weird cast of freak characters you created. I think the time
Adam,
has come.
Adam, it has to happen organically.
Yeah, but it's been
it has
like
to
2
happen
weeks now,
organically.
mate.
It's
been
not
2
something you
weeks.
can. It's not something you can force.
But you called him there a second ago, Jacob the Pending.
Yes, because I haven't come up with anything for him yet.
That's horrible, though, isn't it? Jacob the Pending.
and if you keep trying to force it, Adam, Jacob the Pending, it will be for the rest of his days.
That's horrible. Don't threaten him. You know he's literally there, and he can just turn you off. He can cut your mic, and he should do. He should do. Yeah. Good. I hope you're quiet. Horrible. What a terrible gag. Just for people not watching this on YouTube, he's pretending as if his mic's been cut by sort of talking and nothing's coming out. Yeah.
With a piano and a jar of mayonnaise.
You're an idiot. You're an idiot. I wish I could do that in the office. So we had just like a mute button, and then you basically just chat to yourself and none of us have to hear it. Anyway, that's enough nonsense. Let's talk about the news. It has been a quiet-ish week compared to last week, which was quite dramatic, but we've had a few bits and pieces going on. Jake, what are we starting with?
Well, it has been a big week for airports, Adam. In particular,
love an airport.
It's like easily half to 1/3 of what we cover.
Yeah.
If it were not for airports, then planes would have a lot harder time getting anywhere. Because there would be nowhere to go, and they'd probably all have to land in fields or on highways or something. It would be very disruptive.
Dangerous.
So shout out to airports. We love that they exist. Anyway, it's been a big week for airports in Australia and in New Zealand. We had the ACCC's latest airport monitoring report that's come out. The big four airports in Australia, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth, have posted record aeronautical revenues in.
What does that mean? Sorry, just to don't interrupt. What's an aeronautical revenue? Just makes the money they make from like plane stuff. And
essentially,
yes.
And
not like the WH Smiths.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
And car park revenue was also very, very high, but that's sort of, I believe, separate from the aeronautical side of things. So they've brought in major aeronautical revenues in 2023-24. Now, this was driven in large part, according to the ACCC, by the continued recovery in international passenger numbers, which rose 32.1% at the four airports monitored.
That's enormous. I know we're still coming back from COVID, but nonetheless, up 30% is a gigantic leap.
And domestic passengers were also up, but just by 6.7%. So domestic still slower to recover than international. Sydney, Melbourne, and Brisbane, they grew their profits from aeronautical operations. Perth saw a bit of a drop due to increased security expenses and depreciation, but Sydney was the most profitable of the four major airports. They also ranked highly for passengers. Passengers all ranked them as good for quality of service. Though the airlines ranked them only satisfactory. The airlines are less happy with the airports than the passengers are.
Not very nice, a bit rude, isn't it? Bearing in mind, as you say, the airlines can't operate without airports, so I want to keep them on board.
But the airports also can operate without airlines. It's a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah, good point.
I mean, without airlines, there would be nowhere to go from the airport. You'd have to get a bus. And at that point, why not just have a bus port?
Yes, a bus port. Yeah, go on.
But with these record high revenues, another thing that's happening is the airports are pouring set to over the next decade pour billions and billions of dollars into infrastructure upgrades. We love infrastructure upgrades for airports here at Australian Aviation. Can't get enough of them. Bring on all the infrastructure upgrades. It's say that 10 times quickly.
Twister, isn't it? Yeah.
Infrastructure upgrades. The four largest airports in Australia are set to pour around $19 billion on critical infrastructure upgrades. There we go. Over the next 10 years. Already in 2023-24, they collectively invested almost $1 billion, so $985.1 million in aeronautical facilities. More than half of this, by the way, was Melbourne. So Melbourne had a major runway resurfacing.
Can you not speak? It's like you've
a runway
malfunctioned,
resurfacing as part of its infrastructure upgrades.
Right.
Selling seashells by the seashore. So a major runway resurfacing. at Melbourne. The airport is planning construction of a third runway. It's planning to expand its international terminal here in Sydney. Sydney is in May set to begin an upgrade to its T2 domestic terminal.
So this means you don't have to mess about with your laptop and everything.
Yep,
They're going to
so
make it like T1.
That's one of them.
Right.
Yeah, so the security screening here in Sydney is getting an upgrade at Terminal 2, which is the terminal for Virgin, Jetstar, and regional airlines. And that's, to put in these new security scanners where you don't have to take stuff out of your bag. It's to put in, new check-in kiosks. It's to kind of revamp the experience. Sydney Airport has basically said that it wants to get all of its customers at Terminal 2 from the curb to the gate within 15 minutes. So check-in, bag drop, security areas are all getting overhauled. So more self-service check-in kiosks, advanced bag drop systems, next generation security technology, state-of-the-art scanners.
Wow, go on! You're really giving this a
all
big,
of these,
oomph.
all of these big whiz-bang upgrades
tell
to
you-
make life a bit more tolerable when you're going through Terminal 2, which apparently, if it were a standalone airport, would be the fourth largest in Australia.
What is really impressive, we talk about the new technology for your laptops and your bags and all this kind of malarkey and the self-check-in thingies. Have you been to the international terminal at Sydney, and have you been to the McDonald's there?
Yes,
it's amazing.
yes, I have. Incredible.
So for those of you that aren't aware, one of the most incredible things in all of Australian aviation, so it's like a McDonald's. Well, it is a McDonald's, but the burgers, like they come down like this kind of, or like it's like a Wallace and Gromit style mechanical contraption. I don't think this in any way makes it efficient, but it just looks amazing. So you're there.
Saves space, I think.
Yeah. So you basically, I think the way it works is like they make it upstairs, and then it comes down like the chute or whatever. And it's just extraordinary. It's extraordinary. So I think what I would be asking for is, have your self-check-in kiosk and all this malarkey. Can we have more of those McDonald's in the domestic terminals, please?
I will ask Sydney Airport to get on that. So the T2 domestic terminal, I always found it funny, by the way, that in Sydney, the Qantas terminal had the new scanners and the everything else terminal had the old crappy scanners.
Yeah.
Whereas in Melbourne, the everything else terminal has the new nice scanners, and the Qantas terminal has the old crappy scanners.
That's just the kind of crazy socialists in Melbourne, isn't it? They're like raging against the machine, raging against Qantas. Let's get the poor people getting their Jetstar and Virgin flights. Let's give them the better facilities. Yeah, it works.
Possibly,
it works. Yeah.
So Sydney is doing this big upgrade to the T2 domestic terminal. Brisbane is revamping its domestic terminal and its international terminal over in Perth. And I saw the works for this when I was over there at the end of January. They have this big transformation project for the One Airport project. They're putting in new multi-story car parks and airport hotels, and they're bringing everything into the airport central precinct. So the airports are splashing a lot of cash on infrastructure upgrades, including runway resurfacing and other things that are
Love a
difficult to
bit
say.
of runway resurfacing, a bit of new concrete going down. Beautiful.
And a brief side tangent, a bit of new concrete that went down was in Queenstown in New Zealand, where they have installed this emergency engineered materials arresting system.
It's like a quicksand, basically.
Yeah, so basically it's this cellular blocks of concrete at the end of the runway that are designed to crush under the weight of an aircraft if it overshoots the runway, and effectively stop it in a lot less space than, say, a grass field would.
Yeah. What would be quite good, because I think we need to go and check this out, is we send you to Queenstown, right? And maybe like I throw a ball and you run after it and you end up in there and it just crumbles under the weight and you're just stuck in there forever. Just stuck at the end of a... Have you seen the end of Shaun of the Dead where they got like where Nick Frost becomes like a zombie and he stays in like the garage or whatever? Maybe you could just permanently live there and I just visit you occasionally and feed you, but you just stay at the end of the runway. It's a tangent, isn't it? I think it'd be quite funny.
I think it can support the weight of a human body.
Nonsense. Go on.
And then getting back to airport infrastructure and airports in general, we have Western Sydney Airport, which one commenter on our Facebook page said was set to be the Sydney equivalent of Gatwick.
Yeah, horrible thing to say.
Yeah, it's for those of us who are not familiar with
It's
Gatwick,
the worst of Britain, and that's saying something. It is a part of the empire which didn't go to plan. Put it that way.
What is it like at Gatwick, Adam?
It is like hearing 1,000 screams of dying orphans all at the same time. It is it's rubbish. It is rubbish. I would say that most of the London airports actually are not a very good customer experience, but Gatwick's just particularly rubbish because it's not Heathrow. It's not anywhere near as big as Heathrow. It hasn't got anywhere near as good a transport into London. There's nothing massively wrong with it. It's just a bit meh. Whereas when we look at the new Western Sydney airport, it's got these incredible views over the kind of rolling hills of Western Sydney. And also, like, it's beautiful. It's almost, when you go to Western Sydney airport, and I saw it, a year, 18 months ago, when they were still building it, it looks like a kind of hotel, like a swanky hotel, not an airport. So I think the idea you want to take one of the most beautiful and modern airports in the world and compare it to Gatwick. You don't want to compare it to Gatwick.
Adam, if you had to fly into only one London airport for the rest of your life, which would be worse, Luton or Gatwick?
It's hard to say. You've got Luton, Stansted, Gatwick, all rubbish. The problem with Luton is it's full of what we would call chavs and you would call povos. Basically just like stupid, poor, drunk people getting
That's
up
not
right.
very nice, Adam.
But they are, though. Like, I'm sorry, Luton is a hellhole. It is the worst. You thought Gatwick was bad. We've somehow made somewhere even worse. Luton, Stansted, it's just dire. And they basically, like, inside, all it is, the shops are just pubs and everyone's just drunk. And they're all getting on the flight and they're having fights and they're rowing. The magic of flight, the romance of flying, we stamped that out in His Majesty's United Kingdom a long time ago. It's grim. It's awful. But I think I would rather, Gatwick versus Luton, I'd rather Gatwick than Luton. Luton is just horrible. Grim.
Well, there you go, straight from the horse's mouth. Anyway, getting back to Western Sydney now.
Oh, yeah.
After that expedition to Mother England's green shores, or grey...
Green and pleasant lands.
Or grey and unpleasant concrete fields.
Yeah.
We've had some announcements out of Western Sydney. First of all, the federal government has, in a pre-election pledge, promised $1 billion
Is that meant to be Dr. Evil from Austin Powers?
Yes, it is.
Right.
They've invested $1 billion to secure rail corridors for the new Bradfield Aerotropolis. So this is basically, the plan is to connect the Bradfield Aerotropolis and by extension Western Sydney with Leppington in the southwest of Sydney, and that would provide an alternative to going northbound to St Mary. So if you want to go to Sydney southwest, the Leppington area, that sort of thing. Or if you want to go to more the south area of the Sydney, you don't have to go all the way up to St Mary's and all the way around, or you don't have to take a bus.
But from what I might have got this wrong, from what I gather, Sydney's got the metro, right? The eastern Sydney's got its metro, or a couple of metro lines, right? And then at the moment, or when it opens, Western Sydney kind of has its own metro, which doesn't go to the main city, which is kind of disconnected. And this is like the plan to connect it up via the southernmost point of the metro.
So I'm not certain whether that is going to be an extension to the metro, or whether that's going to be heavy rail from Leppington.
Yeah.
But either way, it would give an alternative to St Mary. And if you live in Leppington or Edmondson Park or any of those new suburbs that are springing up around the airport, and you are working at the airport, which it would be a big catchment area for people working at the airport.
Yeah.
You don't want to be having to hop a bus to the airport every day if you can't help it, or driving. Having that rail link there would be excellent for people who work there and need to get there on a daily basis.
I'd hope it's one of the new metro trains, because the old heavy rail, as they're called, those double-decker trains, they're horrible. They're slow, they're grim, they just look ugly. And I love trains. If there were like an Australian Trains magazine, I'd rather be there, but you know what it is, I love infrastructure, so this was the nearest thing I could get. But there's something about a double-decker train which is horrible. At least an underground train, it's sleek, it's sexy.
We love our double-decker trains.
Yeah, they're horrible though.
Don't you insult our double-decker trains.
They're just what's the point in them? They're just so slow and cumbersome and whatever. So anyway, it's been a very, very good week for infrastructure.
We
Go
also
on.
have had at Western Sydney the airport itself and the New South Wales state government are jointly investing in a $16 million fund to entice international airlines to come to Western Sydney. So $8 million government funding, $8 million Western Sydney airport funding. They're calling it the Western Sydney International Takeoff Fund. And it's coming as the tickets are starting to, or supposed to be later this year, going on sale for the flights to and from the airport. So we've already got Qantas and Jetstar are going to be flying to the airport. Singapore Airlines announced last year that they were going to be flying to Western Sydney. This is a fund that will be administered by Destination New South Wales that will supposedly bring in more than 162,000 international passengers and deliver what the state government says will be $530 million of visitor expenditure. So Western Sydney airport is really going all in on attracting as many airlines as it can, because you probably want that at an airport. You want there to be planes going there.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just a large concrete field in the middle of nowhere with a fancy building that nobody's in.
A busport, if you will.
What was it? Berlin? Didn't Berlin build a new airport a few years back that sat empty for ages before it finally got up and running?
That'd be a bit embarrassing, wouldn't it? If you have an airport with no, yeah. I mean, the issue at the moment is that they need to get enough. I reckon it's a kind of a snowball effect. Once you've got X amount of airlines and you become attractive, but they need to get over that initial hurdle. They've only got, at the moment that we know of, one international airline in Singapore. Technically Qantas
and Jetstar would probably also be flying internationally.
Yeah, exactly. So, but they obviously need to kind of get up ahead of steam as well. From what I understand, they've kind of categorised Western Sydney as like a major airport, a major international airport, rather than being categorised as a regional one. And this could also have implications in terms of what would you call it, like the quotas, the open thingies, the
open skies.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, at the moment, some countries effectively have limits on how many flights they can do into Australia. So there's an argument that Western Sydney should be almost exempt from that by classifying it as a regional airport, at least in the short term, while it gets itself going. But nonetheless, it will still be the biggest thing to happen to Australian aviation in generations, the idea of a genuine new international airport. And also globally, there almost isn't many examples in the last 10 or 20 years of big, new international airports opening. It almost doesn't happen. It's upgrading existing ones, but the ambition that you would build what will become eventually the biggest airport in Australia, and you will build a whole new town effectively around it, alongside business parks, etc. It effectively is such an ambitious thing that it kind of has to work for the long-term future in New South Wales.
Yeah, definitely. As an aside, yes, it was Berlin, Berlin Brandenburg Airport. It was the new one that opened in 2020.
But it's 2020. Come on.
The airport started construction, Adam, in 2006.
Right. Yeah, but what did
it started construction in 2006. It was supposed to open in 2011.
Yeah.
But due to poor construction planning, execution, management, and corruption, there were successive delays. It finally got its operational license in May 2020, opened for commercial traffic on the 31st of October 2020. And so it's basically replaced Tempelhof, Schönefeld, and Tegel airports and become the only commercial airport serving Berlin and the surrounding state of Brandenburg. So Berlin Brandenburg Airport was a brand new airport that has just been opened like less than 5 years ago in Berlin. And it was supposed to be opened almost 20 years ago.
I love to see an example.
A little over 10 years ago.
Well, it's good to see German efficiency not always as good as they boast about.
Getting back to Western Sydney, one little piece of bad news that's sort of nobody's really sure about yet, but that fancy new metro line to the Western Sydney airport might not be up and running by the time that it opens. The Transport Minister recently confirmed as the sort of permanent Transport Minister, John Graham, after the resignation of Joe Halen. John Graham, facing I think a New South Wales estimates hearing, basically said, look, there might be a delay. We're not sort of sure when or how long, but we're keeping an eye on that because part of the big thing was that the metro was supposed to open at the same time as the airport.
But to be fair, the big thing is it does look, from all the information we have, that the airport will open on time. So, which is basically towards the back end of next year. that is an extraordinary accomplishment, given that it's basically the biggest kind of infrastructure building project, whatever, in probably 40 or 50 years in New South Wales. I mean, it's probably bigger than building a big stadium. It's an enormous thing. And that this thing had to be built during COVID, which not only caused, obviously lockdowns and what have you, but it was also difficult to get. We had a talent shortage as well. We've got a lack of builders in the country, all that kind of stuff. The idea that it had everything thrown at it, and it looks like it's going to go open on time, is kudos to them.
Yeah,
Good
take
work.
that, take that, Germany.
Yeah.
we beat you once, and we're going to beat you again, but in airports this time.
Wow, that's good to see the Aussies hate the Germans as much as the British do. So we went on to a number of tangents there in the first half of the show. Jay, what are we going to talk about next? What's next in the news?
Something interesting that we came across in the BITRA data.
The BITRA data,
The BITRA data. So economy airfares. Airfares have been a major, there's been a major focus on airfares in Australia for the past however many months or years, because the general consensus has been that they are too high. We've got the airline duopoly that are driving up prices. The exit of Rex and Bonza has increased airfares. And the general consensus has been people are paying too much to fly. There has been an interesting twist in the tale when we noticed last Friday in the BITRA data, the latest domestic airfares data, restricted economy, which is sort of standard, domestic economy. Those airfares since November had crashed. So the base period price in July 2003, where base.
So this is like the index. This is where the index started.
Yeah.
So that's for people that aren't not mathematically, whatever, good with figures. Base is an index, started in 2003. So 2003 is 100.
Yeah, July 2003 is 100. So the index for restricted economy in March, as of this month, is around 55.9, which is the lowest and I went through the Excel spreadsheet, it's the lowest it's been basically ever.
It's extraordinary as well because, again, we've had 2 or 3 years where airfares have been high, where there's been very little change. I mean, it's almost out of nowhere. It has really crashed down. And
it dropped 40 points in the index, from around October. And the reason for this is it's not that the airlines have dramatically slashed their airfares. It's all a result of a change in how Virgin Australia does its bookings. So previously, before November, the cheaper airfares, the light and the choice airfares, would sell out more quickly. And so the closer you booked to the date that you planned to fly, the more likely it was that you would have to take a more expensive flex airfare. But with this change that Virgin implemented in November, the light and the choice airfares, there are now more of them available for longer in your economy class. And what that has done is it's basically lowered the average price of an airfare because there is now more access to cheaper fares. So it's not that Virgin has slashed its fares, it's that you can get more of the cheaper kind.
I see. But they're still, effectively, they've given passengers an additional benefit, or they've given them a better deal, and they're taking advantage of it, which therefore means the average price, even though it may not be ticket by ticket, is kind of gone down.
Exactly. So it is, I suppose, a way to, cut the average price of an airfare without actually, reducing the price of the airfare itself. Just make your cheaper ones available to more people.
And I've also noticed Virgin do seem to be having more and more sales on as well. It does feel that competition is slowly kind of spluttering back into life. Obviously, this year we're now without two domestic airlines in Rex and Bonza, and we've known that everything the ACCC is done on the matter says if you have more airlines on a route, the prices go down. So the worry was always going to be when we're back to just 2 domestic airlines, or 3, but effectively 2, we're going to have a lack of competition. We're going to have prices not go down. So it does feel that there is still a little bit of competition going on. Right, okay, we're going to talk about next.
Well, next we should probably
Go on.
Adam,
You really
talk about,
Go
on the subject of airfares and
Go
such
on.
like, the Aviation Customer Rights Charter.
God, we should do. We should
talk
do.
about that because there have been some submissions to that. And there has also been a rather testy Senate estimates hearing, or not Senate estimates, Senate committee hearing this week.
Just to give a background on this a little bit. So we had an aviation green paper,
Yes.
and then an aviation white paper, and this is kind of like parliamentary mumbo jumbo for the government deciding that they're going to go out and talk to industry, talk to stakeholders about what the plan for aviation in general should be until 2050. So this is like giving the industry a kind of a long-term roadmap to follow. It looked into kind of many things. It looked into like sustainability, accessibility, but one of its kind of recommendations would there be almost like a kind of customer charter that would give customers improved rights when they fly. And it kind of floated the idea that if your flight is cancelled and the reason is like the fault of the airline rather than say being the fault of a cyclone or what have you, if it's the fault of the airline, then you are due like a refund within X amount of time. So that was attempting to make it a little bit more accountable. But this has obviously not like become law or become a thing yet. So effectively the government has it has to kind of encourage more submissions about what their plans are. That's the background. Go on, I'll throw the baton to you.
Yeah, so they've put out this draft of the customer charter, and they have solicited opinions on the subject. So Choice, the consumer advocacy group, has said that it does not go far enough. That, they've said it's a welcome next step, but it's too vague. It's not strong enough. Senior policy and campaigns advisor at Choice, Beatrice Sherwood, said that the charter currently lacks the necessary clarity, comprehensiveness, and strength to adequately protect consumers when flights don't go to plan. If we were to experience another global event like a pandemic, consumers would be no better protected under this draft charter. She said that in some areas the charter would offer weaker protections than those that you currently get under the Australian consumer law. So, for example, you're entitled to a refund or a replacement where flights are delayed or cancelled due to weather events under the consumer guarantee rights, but you may not be under the draft charter. And she spoke about, difficulties obtaining refunds for COVID and travel credits and, inconsistent policies. So what Choice wants is, for example, one of the big things that it wants is the right to a replacement flight or a refund when a flight is significantly delayed or cancelled through no fault of the consumer, whether or not the airline had any control over the circumstances. So even if it was due to weather or what have you, you should have the right, says Choice, to a replacement or a refund. They also want minimum compensation amounts for different scenarios, a standardized format for terms and conditions of carriage, and specific standards for claim times and compensation for damaged or delayed or lost baggage. They also want to know who exactly is going to be enforcing this. Will it be the Aviation Ombuds scheme? How will the regulators ensure compliance? Sherwood said, without a strong enforcement mechanism, the charter risks being ineffective in delivering real consumer protection. So that is what Choice has said. Now, on the flip side, the Regional Aviation Association of Australia has expressed concerns that this sort of one-size-fits-all approach under the charter would disadvantage regional carriers. The association said it would have the potential to impact regional and remote communities across Australia in adverse ways, including increases in prices or reduction in services, an unfair operational burden on regional carriers. Like, for example, if you're a regional carrier, you would be flying to a remote location with no backup aircraft, no engineers. If you're stuck out at Whoop Whoop Airport because engine's fallen off your plane, and you don't have a replacement out there, and you don't have an engineer out there because you can't afford to be putting an engineer at every remote airstrip in Australia, then you are up the creek, and you will not, and you will be penalised under this charter for that. They've said, regional routes have limited services, so people might get a massive delay if their flight is cancelled for regions outside the airline's control. and have to the airline would have to foot the bill because there's not another flight till next week, because that's just how often they operate. And they've also kind of gone in and made the point that these are essential services, and that regional communities need these services. And if an airline fails due to this unfair burden, then that would leave passengers without an airline flying to their airport. So we've had, those are kind of two submissions that we've seen to this customer rights charter. Doesn't go far enough, and applies one size fits all is not the right solution.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I see what they're both saying, but it was always going to be the case that those things would have been considered when they actually have the kind of a detailed rules. I think earlier, Virgin made the point, and I think it was in its submission to the white paper possibly, but they made the point that actually the idea, it may not necessarily be possible to know exactly whose fault it is that a flight was cancelled. So sometimes it will be clearly the airline's fault. Sometimes it will clearly be the weather's fault. Often it's a kind of combination of factors. And even if you were able to get a kind of definitive answer, you may not know for a long time. So they made the argument that it's not always necessarily going to be as simple as people made out. I think you would have to have different rules for smaller regional remote areas, because if there is not another aircraft there that you can jump on a few hours later, then there's simply not. But I would have thought anyway that would be something that would have been considered. But yeah, I do think you need some better form of compensation, and you at very least need to have a kind of ombudsman or whatever, an ombuds with teeth. You need some element of enforcement there, because the worry is that now we've gone back to having two airlines. You lack that natural competition. It could almost be a little bit of a stitch up between Qantas and Virgin when things go wrong. So I do think this customer charter is a good thing. Obviously, what is being the kind of a spanner that's being thrown into the mix is that we're going to have an election in 2 months' time or 6 weeks' time? Yeah. And obviously,
it cannot be more than 2 months from now.
It cannot be more than 2 months now. But if a new government were to come in, there's no guarantee necessarily that they would pursue this. I think they would. I think that the coalition would carry it on. There's not necessarily a guarantee that these things would happen. But I think they're both pretty fair points. I think an argument of the big airlines will be that they will say, obviously, in Europe, in the EU, they have much stronger protections for customers. The airlines might argue that doesn't necessarily make a more reliable service.
And in fact, they have done exactly that.
There you go. Look at that for a link. Go on.
So there was a Senate committee hearing this week talking about this potential pay-on-delay legislation, a scheme that would be similar to what they have in the EU and Canada. Qantas Group and Virgin Australia, they sent representatives to tell the committee, no, this would be a terrible idea. They've said that the compensation schemes, they increase airfares, they do not lead to better outcomes. Marcus Svensson said that the costs over in the US, he's the CEO of Qantas Domestic, he said that the costs are being passed on to consumers, and that this scheme in the EU has created this ambulance chaser industry of, people who will, go to the airlines to file this compensation claim for you and take a chunk of the money from that compensation claim. And he said, he's got nothing good to say about this scheme that he's experienced as a consumer. It hasn't improved cancellations and delays. He says nobody wants to cancel a flight. It's not good for the customer. There's absolutely no incentive for us to cancel flights. Stephen Beckett, the General Manager of Government Affairs, told this committee that the EU airlines have paid out almost or sort of around $9 billion in customer compensation to date. And at the same time, there has been almost a doubling in the number of cancellations. They have, however, both said that they support this independent aviation industry ombudsman to replace the airline consumer advocate industry, the old industry-run scheme, which, as basically people are saying, it's toothless and can't do anything.
I do see their point there, because they would argue that actually, if you're a major airline and you delay a flight or you cancel a flight, obviously that effectively costs them money. They certainly don't make any money out of it. And having been to Virgin's headquarters in Brisbane, and we watch the kind of air operations centre, they're not there twiddling their thumbs. It's a very stressful job. They're all working very, very hard. Sometimes there's only so much you can do. It's very easy to blame airlines, but they are at the mercy of weather. They're at the mercy of engineering problems, kind of beyond their control. Everyone's trying their very best to make sure these things turn up on time. So I do see the argument that if you just penalising us isn't necessarily the right thing to do, maybe the carrot, not the stick. So we've talked about infrastructure, we've talked about airports, we've talked about planes taking off and landing. We pretty much completed aviation, I think. I mean, if we're talking about, is there anything else to talk about now? We've covered all the bases. We've got to talk about something. We've just had a break.
Yeah, well, we could talk about space.
We could do. Well, I see we're moving further and further. What do you want to talk about space?
Well, you had a story, I believe, about Boeing. Adam.
Yes, so obviously the context here for the wider aerospace industry is Boeing last year had another year from hell, which started off with the door plug, effectively the door, blowing off a 787-10. No, it was a 737 MAX. It was 737 MAX.
737 MAX
9.
There we go.
Can you imagine the hate I will get for that? I didn't only get the variant wrong. I actually got the aircraft wrong.
Yeah.
That is an all-time low.
It's disgraceful, Adam.
It is disgraceful. Anyway, so they had a door plug blow off 737 MAX. This would obviously be bad anyway, but it was particularly scandalous because we had 2 high-profile crashes a number of years back, of which Boeing were given an almighty fine. And effectively, the FAA has since that point limited the amount of 737 MAXs that Boeing can make. I think it's like 38 or something. That cap has been in place for a year or so now. Obviously, if you're only allowed to deliver so many aircraft a month, that massively limits the amount of money that Boeing can make. It obviously also comes after the investigation into those 2 crashes, which effectively found that there was a kind of a bad safety culture at Boeing. So if a door's flying off mid-flight, it kind of adds to that. They've obviously had one of their worst years. I think it was their second worst year in history, other than the COVID days, for kind of profits or revenue last year. They're making, I think it's something like 10% of the company redundant. They fired the head of Boeing's Defence and Space Division. So everything's kind of going wrong at the moment. And it's a very hard kind of oil tanker to turn around. If you thought a door plug blowing off an aircraft mid-year was bad, what happened with their Starliner rocket and capsule was even worse. So as probably everybody knows, Boeing has a contract to effectively taxi humans from Earth to the International Space Station. They have been this where they were doing the second the second flight of Starliner to the ISS, but this was the first time they did it crewed. So the first time they actually took astronauts up there. It basically had some kind of minor-ish technical issues on its way to the space station. It then docked. They had planned to have these 2 astronauts on board, stay at the ISS for like a week, and then go back to Earth. However, they weren't 100% sure they could fix the technical issues, which were like a problem with the thrusters, like the little thrusters on the capsule. So they ended up of what was meant to be a week-long stay has become 9 months. They have basically been stuck up there. And one of the problems initially is Boeing's like, oh no, they're not stranded there. Technically speaking, they're not stranded. That's totally wrong. And you had NASA say a similar thing. But I think if you're planning a week-long stay and you are somewhere for 9 months, you are basically stranded. There was no way back. And basically, NASA took the final decision that they were going to take in a kind of final humiliation for Boeing. They were going to take these astronauts home on a SpaceX rocket, which is a Falcon 9 with a Dragon capsule, as they call it, kind of stuck on top. Not a technical space term. And so basically, Elon, your hero, my hero, basically the Donald went, Elon, get those good men and women home. And Elon was like, I'll sort it for you, boss. So
Well, technically, the decision was made under the Biden administration.
Actually, I would say in terms of this, I mean, who said what, we don't know, but eyebrows were raised when, rather than just getting them at the end of last year, they effectively said we're going to wait till February, which become March. They had a little bit of a jiggle around. So the SpaceX, so the rocket blasted off on like Saturday, US.
After a technical delay.
Yeah. Get a one kick into Elon. But anyway, so it blasted off on Saturday. I think Sunday, US time, the capsule kind of docked with the ISS. There's going to be a brief kind of handover period of a few days. And then these 2 astronauts are going to get on their capsule. They're going to come back down to Earth. But yeah, it is another it's obviously good for SpaceX. It's good these two poor people have come home because actually in terms of the amount
Well,
of time...
they're not home yet.
Not yet.
Of time
As
of
we
recording.
record this, they're still doing like the handover. What it does mean, interestingly, is that right now, as we record them, there's 11 humans on the ISS. The ISS was only really was designed for 6. So it's going to be very cramped up there. Presumably they've got, I don't know if they actually have beds, but I don't know if they've got enough sleeping quarters for all of them. Maybe somebody be on like the couch. I don't know if they've got a couch at the ISS. But it's going to be very cramped up there for a few days. And then these 2 astronauts are going to come back. It kind of completes a pretty bad story for NASA, a very bad story for Boeing.
And not a great story for those poor astronauts either.
Well, this is the thing. So to an extent that it's nice that 1 week on the ISS isn't that long. So probably they would have preferred...
It was just a 3-hour tour.
Yeah, but like, so they were meant to be there a week. Probably if someone had said to them, do you want to do a month? They'd have gone, yeah, great. I don't think they necessarily would have wanted to do another 9 months. And the 2 astronauts on board also were both experienced astronauts. It wasn't like their first time in space. So 9 months is a long time. I've got no interest in going to space. I've got no interest in being on my ISS because at first it's amazing. You're looking out the window, you're seeing Earth, you're seeing the stars. Very quickly, it's getting boring. Very, very quickly, it's getting boring. So, they've done 9 months up there. Finally got home. It does also mean from Boeing's point of view, they can put this sort of story behind them. When the Starliner capsule returned to Earth uncrewed, back however long, 6 months or so ago, it did so in perfect condition. So they were worried about these technical problems. In a sense, Boeing were vindicated. But nonetheless, with these astronauts coming back, that will kind of kill the story and allow Boeing to kind of rejuvenate itself a little bit. There you go. I don't like talking about stuff I've written.
It's Gilligan's Space Station, isn't it? Just sit right back and you'll hear a tale of a fateful trip that started from Cape Canaveral aboard a Boeing ship.
That was pretty good, to be fair. Right, we got one more story to finish up with.
Do we?
No, do we? I mean, I'm asking you. We can finish up on space if you like, but
yeah, we can finish up on space. Jane Herdlichka as well has stepped down. We spoke about this a bit last week, but she's posted a valedictory message.
So she's gone now. She's actually formally hung up her keyboard.
She has hung up her wings. And she has left, and Dave Emerson has taken over as CEO. So, Dave, from us here at the Australian Aviation Podcast, congratulations to Jane on your long tenure, on your amazing tenure as CEO of Virgin Australia. And if you'd like to come on the podcast, we'd love to have you.
We'll take you, Jane. We'll take Dave as well. Anyone wants to come on our podcast, we're more than happy to have you.
Not anyone.
No, not anyone.
Aviation related.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, that's been a really good episode. But I think the key message to take home, if you do see us at Avalon, wave from a distance. Don't get too close. We know what you like. Most of you are quite strange. If you do get too close to Jake, apparently he's going to like kick you and punch you like a kangaroo or something.
I think that was you who said you were going to do that.
Yeah, okay. So I'm kicking and punching and you're just like prodding them with your deer stalk things.
Deer stalk
antlers,
things.
Antlers,
there we go.
Antlers. Whatever. Anyway, that's about it for this episode. Jake, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Adam.
And we will be back on the show the same time next week. But from now, from me and Jake, goodbye.
Goodbye.